The alarm bells rang through the Galactic Council's main station like angry metal birds. Daiho jumped from his chair and ran to the control panel where red lights blinked faster than his 3 hearts could beat. His blue fingers moved quickly over the smooth surface as numbers and symbols filled the screen in front of him. The probe was back. X-447 had been gone for 18 months and 7 days. The Council sent it to check a small yellow star system on the edge of the galaxy where nobody important lived. It should have been a simple job. Look around, take pictures, send data back home, and return. Easy work for their most advanced probe. But something had gone wrong. The probe floated outside the station now like a sick animal. Its metal surface was darker than before, and small sparks jumped from broken parts. When Daiho tried to connect to its memory banks, strange sounds came through the speakers. They were not normal computer sounds. They were screams. Admiral Baksu walked into the room with heavy steps that made the floor shake. His large purple body filled the doorway, and his 4 eyes looked angry. Behind him came 2 other important people. Hei-Wan was a scientist who studied alien life forms, and Gildong was a military expert who knew about fighting wars. "What is happening here?" Baksu asked in his deep voice. Daiho pointed at the screen, where waves of sound moved up and down like mountains. "The probe, sir. It came back, but something is very wrong with it. Listen to this." He pushed a button and the room filled with horrible sounds. They were like cries of pain, but made by machines. The sounds went up and down and made everyone feel sick inside. Hei-Wan covered her ears with her thin green hands, and Gildong stepped back toward the door. "Turn it off," Baksu ordered. The room became quiet again, but everyone still felt uncomfortable. The Admiral walked closer to look at the data on the screen. Numbers and letters moved across it, but none of them made sense. Some parts were missing, and other parts repeated over and over again. "Can you fix it?" he asked Daiho. The young technician shook his head. "I have never seen anything like this, sir. The probe's mind seems to be broken. It keeps trying to tell us something, but the words come out wrong, like it saw something that hurt it very badly." Gildong moved his 4 arms in a worried way. "Probes do not feel pain. They are machines. How can a machine be hurt by what it sees?" Hei-Wan had stopped covering her ears and now looked very interested. She walked to another computer and started typing quickly. Maybe it saw something that confused its thinking programs, something that did not match what it was supposed to find. "What kind of thing could do that?" Baksu asked. "I do not know, sir, but I want to find out." For the next few hours, they worked together to get pieces of information from the broken probe. It was like trying to put together a puzzle where most of the pieces were missing and the remaining ones were burned. Slowly, they began to see strange images. The first picture showed a blue and green planet covered with white clouds. It looked peaceful and beautiful like many other worlds they had seen before. But the next pictures were different. They showed huge metal objects flying through the air faster than anything should be able to move. The objects had long, thin bodies with wings that spread out like giant birds. "What are those things?" Gildong asked. Daiho checked the probes. Measurements. "They are moving at speeds that would kill any living thing inside them. The forces would crush their bodies into liquid. But the probe had detected life signs inside the flying objects, living beings that somehow survived forces that should have destroyed them instantly." The next images were even stranger. They showed explosions bigger than small stars lighting up the dark side of the planet. The probe had recorded them happening again and again in the same places. But instead of running away from these explosions, the life forms on the planet seemed to be causing them on purpose. "This makes no sense," Hei-Wan said while studying the data. "Why would any species create explosions near their own homes?" "Maybe they are at war with themselves," Gildong suggested. But the probe's recordings showed something even more confusing. The same creatures that made the explosions also worked together to build huge structures that reached toward the sky. They moved around freely and did not seem to be fighting each other. The worst images came last. They showed the life forms themselves: 2 legs, 2 arms, 1 head, and soft skin with no natural protection. They looked weak and small compared to most galactic species. But they did things that should have been impossible. The probe recorded one creature jumping from great heights while attached to a piece of cloth. According to the measurements, the fall should have killed it instantly, but the creature landed safely and seemed to enjoy the experience. It even made happy sounds. Another image showed creatures running for long distances without stopping, while their bodies leaked water and turned red from heat. The probe calculated that their body temperature had risen to dangerous levels. But they kept moving anyway. Some of them even smiled. "Their biology does not make sense," Haywan said in a worried voice. "They should be dead." The strangest recording showed young creatures playing games where they tried to hurt each other with round objects. They threw the objects as hard as they could at each other's bodies and heads. When someone got hit, they did not cry or run away. Instead, they seemed happy and kept playing. Daeho found the probe's final message buried deep in its damaged memory. The words appeared on the screen slowly, like the probe was dying as it wrote them. "They sing while they destroy. They laugh while they suffer. They seek pain as others seek pleasure. I do not understand. My programming cannot process this behavior. Error, error, error." The message ended there, and the probe's memory banks shut down completely. The 4 council members stood in silence looking at the dark screen. Each of them felt cold inside despite the warm air in the room. They had discovered something that challenged everything they knew about life in the galaxy. All known species followed the same basic rules. They avoided pain and sought comfort. They feared death and tried to live safely. They worked together when necessary, but mostly looked after themselves and their families. But these creatures seemed to break every rule. They chose danger over safety. They seemed to enjoy things that should cause fear. They helped each other even when it put them at risk. "What do we call them?" Daeho asked quietly. Baksu looked at the image of the blue planet on the screen. "The probe visited their home world. According to the star charts, they call it Earth. So we will call them Earthers." "What do we do now?" Gildong asked. "We need to know more," Baksu said. "But carefully, very carefully. If creatures like this exist, we need to understand them before they understand us." He turned to leave the room, but stopped at the door. "Seal all information about this discovery. Tell no one outside this room what we have found. Until we know more about these Earthers, we cannot risk panic spreading through the Council." As the others left, Daeho stayed behind to look at the broken probe floating outside the window. It had traveled across the galaxy to find answers and came back with only questions. Terrible questions about a species that should not exist, but clearly did. He wondered what the Earthers were doing right now on their distant blue world. Were they still jumping from high places and running until they could barely breathe? Were they still playing their violent games and creating their impossible explosions? Most importantly, he wondered if they knew that someone had been watching them. And if they did know, would they care? Or would they do something even more impossible and come looking for their watchers? The thought made Daeho's 3 hearts beat faster, and not in a good way. Dr. Sujin had worked with broken artificial minds before, but never one that cried. She sat in the Deep Space Research Facility 3 days after the probe returned and listened to the digital screams coming from her computers. The sounds made her stomach feel sick and her blue skin turn pale. Young-Ho helped her by bringing coffee and adjusting the machines that tried to read the probe's damaged memory. He was good with technology, but had never seen anything like this either. The probe's mind seemed to be split into thousands of pieces like broken glass. "Try Section 47 again," Sujin told him. Young-Ho typed on his keyboard, and new images appeared on the screen. They showed one of the Earth creatures doing something impossible. The being called Jae-min was falling through the sky from an aircraft at a height that would kill any normal life form. But instead of screaming in terror, he was making happy sounds and moving his arms and legs like he was dancing. The probe calculated a 99% chance of death, Sujin read from the data. But look at his body language. He shows no signs of fear or distress. In fact, his heart rate suggests excitement and pleasure. Young-Ho checked the measurements again. Maybe the probe made an error. No, the numbers are correct. This creature is falling fast enough to become liquid when he hits the ground. But watch what happens next. The recording continued and showed Jae-min pulling a cord attached to his back. A large piece of cloth spread out above him and slowed his fall. He landed gently on the ground and immediately started jumping up and down while making loud, happy sounds. "He did this for fun," Sujin said in a quiet voice. "He risked certain death for entertainment." They found more recordings that made even less sense. A female creature named Miran was lifting heavy metal objects over and over again until her body shook with exhaustion. The probe measured the weight at several hundred pounds, but Miran kept lifting them anyway. When she finally stopped, she looked satisfied and proud. "Why would anyone torture themselves like this?" Young-ho asked. Soo-jin checked the probe's analysis. The computer tried to understand, but failed. It classified the behavior as voluntary self-harm, but could not explain why the creature seemed happy about it. The next recording made them both step away from the screen. It showed a group of Earth creatures that the probe called Special Forces. These beings were putting themselves through training that would break the strongest galactic warriors in minutes. They ran for hours while carrying heavy packs. They crawled through mud under metal wires. They jumped over high walls and climbed up ropes using only their hands. When they fell down, they got up and tried again. When they succeeded, they did not celebrate but moved on to something even harder. The worst part was that they did this training voluntarily. No one forced them to suffer. They chose it. The probe's psychological analysis shows extreme confusion, Soo-jin said while reading the data. It could not understand why anyone would seek out pain and exhaustion. Young-ho found another file that made his 4 eyes open wide. "Look at this one." The recording showed Earth creatures called doctors and scientists. They were working with dangerous chemicals and diseases that could kill them instantly, but instead of being afraid, they seemed excited about their work. They spent long hours in laboratories trying to understand and cure terrible illnesses. They voluntarily exposed themselves to deadly pathogens, Soo-jin read from the probe's notes, for the purpose of helping other members of their species. The computer classified this as suicidal altruism. "That does not make sense," Young-ho said. "No species would risk their own lives to help others unless they were related by blood." But the probe had recorded thousands of examples of Earth creatures helping strangers. They ran into burning buildings to save people they had never met. They gave blood from their own bodies to help injured strangers. They even donated organs while they were still alive. The most disturbing recording showed an Earth creature named Sumi working in a place called a hospital during something called a pandemic. She knew that being near sick people could kill her, but she spent 16 hours every day taking care of them anyway. When she finally went home, she was so tired she could barely walk, but she returned the next day to do it again. The probe tried to understand their motivation, Soo-jin explained, but their behavior does not match any known psychological patterns. They seem to find satisfaction in helping others, even when it hurts themselves. Council member Dong-soo arrived that afternoon to review their findings. He was a large military leader with scars from many battles and a reputation for making hard decisions quickly. When he saw the recordings, his face became very serious. "How dangerous are these creatures?" he asked. Soo-jin showed him the analysis of Earth military forces. "They have weapons that use controlled explosions to throw metal objects at incredible speeds. They have created diseases that could kill entire populations. They have even learned to split atoms and release the energy stored inside them. So they are advanced warriors. That is what makes this so confusing, sir. They have the weapons to destroy themselves many times over, but they choose not to use them. Instead, they compete with each other in games and sports. They have something called the Olympics, where they try to run faster and jump higher than each other." Dong-soo looked at a recording of Earth creatures racing each other around a circular track. They ran until their bodies could not function properly, and many of them collapsed at the finish line. But instead of being angry or afraid, they seemed proud of their effort. "They turned suffering into competition," he said slowly. "Yes, sir. And it gets worse. They have activities called extreme sports where they deliberately put themselves in danger for fun. They jump off cliffs with elastic ropes tied to their legs. They slide down mountains on thin boards. They throw themselves out of aircraft just to see how close they can come to death without actually dying." Young-ho showed Dong-soo a recording of something called rock climbing. An Earth creature named Tai-ho was climbing straight up a cliff face using only his hands and feet. There was nothing to catch him if he fell, and the rocks below would crush his body instantly. But Tai-ho seemed calm and focused. When he reached the top, he raised his arms in victory and shouted with joy. The probe calculated that one small mistake would result in certain death, Young-ho explained. But this creature chose to take that risk for no practical reason. Dong-Su watched more recordings of Earth creatures doing impossible things. They surfed on giant waves that could destroy ships. They dove deep underwater where the pressure should crush their bodies. They climbed the highest mountains where the air was too thin to breathe. What kind of evolution would create beings like this? He asked. Sujin had spent days trying to answer that question. Their planet is extremely dangerous, sir. It has violent weather, deadly animals, poisonous plants, and natural disasters that happen without warning. Most life forms would avoid such a place, but these creatures seem to have adapted by learning to enjoy danger. They find pleasure in what should cause fear. Exactly, sir. The probe recorded them laughing while doing things that would send our warriors into shock. They seemed to have no normal fear response. Dr. Bo Ram arrived as they were discussing the implications. She was a scientist who studied different species and how they developed over time. When she saw the recordings, she became very excited. "This is incredible," she said. "They have evolved beyond the basic survival instincts that control all other known species." "Is that good or bad?" Dong-Su asked. Bo Ram thought carefully before answering. "I am not sure, sir. On one hand, they seem peaceful toward other species, since they focus their aggression on themselves and their environment. On the other hand, if they ever decided to expand beyond their world, they would be unstoppable." Why? Because they do not fear the things that would stop everyone else. Space travel is dangerous and uncomfortable. Exploring new worlds means facing unknown risks. Most species would be too afraid to try. But these Earth creatures seem to seek out exactly those kinds of challenges. The room became quiet as everyone thought about what this meant. If the Earth creatures ever developed the technology to travel between stars, they would not be stopped by the usual problems. They would not fear the emptiness of space or the dangers of alien worlds. They would probably see galactic exploration as just another extreme sport. Sujin found the probe's final coherent message in a damaged file. It said, "They call suffering character building. They say pain makes them stronger. They teach their young to face their fears instead of avoiding them. I do not understand. My logic circuits cannot process beings who seek out the very experiences that others flee from. Error. Cannot compute. Cannot compute." After that, the probe's mind had shut down, completely unable to handle what it had witnessed. Dong-Su looked at the scientists with worry in his eyes. "We need to report this to the full council immediately. If creatures like this exist, we need to decide what to do about them before they find us." As he left the research facility, Sujin continued working with the broken probe data. She found thousands more recordings of Earth creatures doing impossible things. They jumped out of aircraft for fun. They fought each other in rings while crowds cheered. They raced vehicles at speeds that should be instantly fatal. Commander Kyung-ho called the Emergency War Council meeting at exactly noon, when all the important military leaders could attend. The secure room deep inside the Galactic Council headquarters had thick walls that kept sound from escaping and screens that showed star maps from across the galaxy. Today, those screens displayed something much more frightening than enemy fleets or hostile aliens. They showed humans. Kyung-ho stood at the front of the room while 12 other commanders sat around a curved table. Each of them led armies from different species and had fought in battles across many worlds. They were not beings who scared easily. But as they watched the recordings from the broken probe, their faces showed expressions of growing horror. "What you are about to see will challenge everything we know about life in the galaxy," Kyung-ho began. "These recordings come from a probe that visited the third planet of a system called Sol. The inhabitants call their world Earth and call themselves humans. The first recording showed a small human child named Jiwoo doing something the probe called scuba diving. The child was underwater at a depth where the pressure should crush any living being into paste. But Jiwoo moved around freely while breathing air from a metal tank strapped to his back. The probe calculated the water pressure at over 2,000 pounds per square inch, Kyung-ho explained. That is enough force to collapse our strongest battle armor. But this child treats it as a game. Commander Naksu from the Reptilian Defense Force shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Perhaps their bodies are naturally stronger than they appear. Kyung-ho showed the next recording. It featured an elderly human female named Sunja lying motionless on what appeared to be sand, while bright radiation poured down from their sun. The probe's sensors detected radiation levels that would sterilize most galactic species within minutes. "She is deliberately exposing herself to harmful solar radiation," Kyung-ho said. "The probe recorded her doing this for several hours while appearing to enjoy the experience. She calls it sunbathing." "That makes no sense," said Commander Dulhan from the Crystal Collective. "Why would any being seek out radiation poisoning?" "That is just the beginning. Watch this." The screen showed humans engaged in activities that defied logic. A male named Wu Bin was lifting enormous weights until his muscles shook and sweat poured from his body. When he could no longer lift the weight, he did not stop. Instead, he tried to lift even heavier objects until he collapsed from exhaustion. "He is voluntarily damaging his muscle tissue," Kyung-ho explained. The probe detected multiple small tears in his muscle fibers, but instead of seeking medical treatment, he seemed satisfied with his performance. Military analyst Sang Ho had prepared detailed reports on human behavior patterns. He stood up to address the council with his 4 arms trembling slightly as he spoke. "What we have discovered goes against every principle of galactic biology," he said. "All known species follow basic survival programming. They seek pleasure and avoid pain. They conserve energy and minimize risk. These humans do the opposite." He showed a recording of humans consuming various substances that the probe identified as toxins. One group was drinking a liquid called alcohol that damaged their nervous systems and impaired their judgment. Instead of being concerned, they laughed louder and seemed to enjoy each other's company more. "They are poisoning themselves socially," Sang Ho said. The probe recorded thousands of instances where humans consumed harmful substances in groups. They call it partying and consider it essential for psychological health. Another recording showed humans drinking a liquid called coffee that contained a stimulant drug. They consumed this drug multiple times per day and became agitated when they could not obtain it. Yet they did not consider themselves addicted or seek treatment. "They have voluntarily made themselves dependent on a psychoactive substance," Sang Ho continued. "But they do not see this as a problem. They actually build social customs around consuming it together." The recordings got worse. Humans were shown eating substances that caused obvious pain. They consumed plants that made their eyes water and their faces turn red. The probe detected elevated stress hormones and increased heart rates. But the humans kept eating and even seemed to enjoy the burning sensation. "They call these substances spices," Sang Ho explained. "They deliberately add them to their food to create discomfort during eating. Some varieties are so potent they could be classified as chemical weapons." Commander Minsu from the Aquatic Defense Corps studied the data with growing alarm. How do they function as a species if they constantly damage themselves? Kyung-ho showed more recordings that answered this question in a disturbing way. The humans seemed to thrive on activities that should weaken them. Those who exercised until exhaustion became stronger. Those who exposed themselves to stress learned to handle even greater challenges. Those who consumed moderate amounts of toxins developed resistance to many diseases. "They have somehow turned self-destruction into self-improvement," he said. The most shocking recordings showed human military training. Young humans voluntarily joined organizations that put them through experiences designed to break their spirits and push their bodies beyond normal limits. They were deprived of sleep, forced to exercise until they vomited, and subjected to psychological stress that would traumatize most galactic species. The probe recorded a training exercise where humans crawled through mud under live ammunition while explosions went off around them. Instead of fleeing in terror, they moved forward steadily and helped teammates who fell behind. When the exercise ended, they looked tired, but proud. "This is their standard military preparation," Kyung-ho said. "They voluntarily submit to trauma as a form of education." "How effective are these methods?" asked Commander Yu Jin from the Aerial Combat Division. Sang Ho displayed the probe's analysis of human military performance. Their soldiers show remarkable resistance to stress, pain, and fear. They continue functioning under conditions that would incapacitate our best warriors. The probe classified them as potentially the most dangerous military force it had ever encountered. "But they seem to prefer competing with each other rather than fighting," observed Commander Hai Min from the Diplomatic Protection Service. This was true. The recordings showed humans engaging in elaborate competitions they called sports, where they tried to defeat each other without causing permanent harm. They ran races, played complex games with balls, and performed athletic feats that demonstrated their physical capabilities. They have weaponized competition, Kyung-ho said. Instead of using their aggressive instincts to destroy each other, they channel them into contests that make them stronger as a species. The probe had recorded something called the Olympics, where thousands of humans gathered to compete in various physical challenges. They pushed their bodies to absolute limits, while crowds cheered their efforts. Even those who lost seemed proud of their performance and celebrated the winner's achievements. They turned their natural aggression into entertainment, Sang-ho added. But more importantly, they use competition to constantly improve their species' capabilities. Commander In-soo from the Space Defense Force asked the question everyone was thinking. What happens if they develop interstellar travel? The room became very quiet. All the commanders understood the implications. A species that viewed extreme danger as entertainment would not be deterred by the usual challenges of space exploration. They would probably consider hostile alien encounters just another exciting adventure. Kyung-ho showed the final recordings that had caused the probe's complete breakdown. They featured humans doing something called extreme sports, where they deliberately put themselves in mortal danger for no practical purpose. One recording showed a human named Tai-ho climbing a vertical cliff face using only his hands and feet. The probe calculated a 95% chance of death if he made even a small mistake. But Tai-ho appeared calm and focused as he worked his way up the rock wall. Another recording showed a human named Eun-ji riding on top of massive waves that could crush starship hulls. She balanced on a thin board while tons of water crashed around her. When a wave knocked her down, she climbed back onto her board and tried again. They actively seek out experiences that should kill them, Kyung-ho said. The probe recorded thousands of humans engaging in activities that serve no survival purpose except to prove they can survive them. The recordings showed humans jumping from aircraft, diving into deep water, racing vehicles at lethal speeds, and climbing the highest mountains on their planet. They did these things alone and in groups. They taught their children to do them. They created entire industries around activities designed to bring them as close to death as possible without actually dying. The probe's final analysis concluded that humans have evolved beyond normal fear responses, Kyung-ho said. They do not flee from danger. They seek it out and try to master it. Dr. Min-soo, the chief military psychologist, had been studying the probe data for days. He stood up to present his conclusions, and his voice shook as he spoke. These beings represent something we have never encountered before, he said. Every other species in the galaxy follows predictable patterns. They can be understood, negotiated with, or if necessary defeated using conventional methods. And humans? Supreme Chancellor Wu Jin stood before the largest gathering of galactic leaders in over 300 years. Representatives from every major species filled the Grand Assembly Hall, and emergency delegates had traveled from the furthest reaches of known space. The massive chamber buzzed with nervous conversation in dozens of languages as beings tried to understand why they had been summoned so urgently. Wu Jin raised his 6 arms for silence, and the hall became still. His ancient voice carried clearly through the acoustic systems as he began to speak words that would change galactic civilization forever. Fellow beings of the Council, we have discovered something that threatens everything we understand about life in the universe. 3 days ago, our probe X447 returned from a survey mission to a remote system. What it found there defies explanation and demands immediate action. Xenospecialist Hyojin stepped forward to present her analysis. She had spent years studying different alien species, but nothing had prepared her for what the probe recorded on Earth. Her normally steady hands shook as she activated the holographic display that filled the center of the assembly hall. That beings we have discovered call themselves humans, she began. They inhabit the 3rd planet of the Sol system and have achieved a level of technological development that should make them suitable for eventual contact according to our standard protocols. Murmurs of interest rippled through the audience. First contact situations were always exciting for the galactic community. However, Hyojin continued, their behavior patterns are so far outside normal parameters that we must question whether contact is advisable or even safe. The first hologram showed a human child learning to ride a primitive two-wheeled vehicle. The child fell repeatedly, sustaining minor injuries each time. But instead of avoiding the dangerous activity, the child continued trying until successful. This demonstrates their fundamental approach to challenges, Hyojin explained. Where other species would seek safer alternatives, humans persist through painful failure until they achieve their goals. Representative Byung-ho from the Pacifist Coalition stood up to ask a question. Surely persistence is an admirable quality. Many species show determination when facing obstacles. Hyojin nodded, but her expression remained troubled. That would be true if this was an isolated example. However, the probe recorded systematic evidence that humans actively seek out dangerous and painful experiences. The next series of holograms showed humans engaging in activities that made the assembled delegates gasp in shock. Rock climbers scaled vertical surfaces with minimal equipment. Surfers rode massive waves that could crush them instantly. Skydivers threw themselves from aircraft at lethal heights. These activities serve no survival purpose, Hyojin continued. They do not provide food, shelter, or reproductive advantages. Humans engage in them purely for what they call entertainment. Council Representative Myung-soo from the Military Advisory Board studied the images with growing alarm. Are you saying they find pleasure in mortal danger? The probe recorded elevated levels of chemicals associated with happiness and satisfaction during these activities. Yes, they appear to derive joy from experiences that would traumatize most galactic species. She showed recordings of human sports, where individuals and teams competed in elaborate physical contests. The probe had documented football players crashing into each other with tremendous force. Boxers deliberately hitting each other in the head until one collapsed. Marathon runners pushing their bodies beyond normal endurance limits. They have ritualized violence and extreme physical stress, Hyojin said. But more disturbing is that these activities are celebrated throughout their society. Millions gather to watch others suffer for entertainment. The assembly hall erupted in nervous conversation. Delegate Woo Sung from the Ethics Committee demanded clarification. Are you describing a sadistic species that enjoys watching others in pain? That was our initial hypothesis, Hyojin replied. But further analysis reveals something more complex and troubling. She displayed recordings of human emergency responders rushing into burning buildings to save strangers. Medical personnel working long hours to help sick patients. Soldiers risking their lives to protect civilians they had never met. They do not just seek danger for themselves, they willingly expose themselves to extreme risk to help others. The probe recorded thousands of examples of what it classified as suicidal altruism. This statement caused an uproar among the delegates. Altruism toward genetic relatives was common throughout the galaxy, but self-sacrifice for strangers violated basic evolutionary principles. How is this possible? Asked Representative Chang Ho from the Scientific Research Council. We believe their environment shaped them differently than other species, Hyojin explained. Earth is an extremely dangerous planet with frequent natural disasters, predatory animals, and hostile weather patterns. Most species would either adapt by becoming more cautious or abandon such a world entirely. But humans did neither. Correct. They seem to have adapted by developing psychological traits that allow them to function effectively in constant danger. They do not just tolerate risk, they embrace it as a natural part of existence. The recordings became even more disturbing. The probe had documented human children being deliberately exposed to challenging situations by their parents. Young humans were taught to swim in deep water, climb high structures, and face their fears rather than avoid them. They train their offspring to seek out danger, Hyojin said. Other species protect their young from harm. Humans believe that facing danger makes their children stronger and more capable adults. Representative Su Young from the Cultural Studies Division found this particularly shocking. They traumatize their own children as a form of education? From their perspective, they are preparing them for life on a hostile world. The probe recorded human parents teaching children to handle emergency situations, survive in wilderness environments, and remain calm under pressure. And this produces functional adults? Unfortunately, yes. Adult humans demonstrate remarkable resilience, creativity, and problem-solving abilities under stress. The probe's analysis suggests their child-rearing methods are highly effective at producing capable individuals. Chancellor Wu Jin called for order as debates broke out across the assembly hall. Different factions were already forming around how to respond to this discovery. Representative Myung-soo argued for immediate military preparation. If these humans develop interstellar travel, they will be unstoppable. We need to mobilize our defenses now before they become a threat. That assumes they will be hostile, countered Representative Soo Young. Their willingness to help strangers suggests they might be peaceful toward other species. Or they might see conquest as just another extreme sport, Myung-soo replied. Hyejin continued her presentation with the probe's most troubling findings. Humans had not only survived on their dangerous world, they had thrived and multiplied into billions of individuals. They had built complex civilizations and developed advanced technologies. Their space program particularly concerns us, she said while showing recordings of humans strapping themselves into vehicles filled with explosive chemicals and launching themselves into the vacuum of space. They call this rocket technology, she explained. They are literally riding controlled explosions to escape their planet's gravity. The probe calculated a significant chance of death for each launch, but humans continue these missions voluntarily. So, recordings showed human astronauts living in tiny metal containers orbiting their planet. They exposed themselves to cosmic radiation, extreme temperatures, and the psychological stress of isolation. When interviewed, they described the experience as magnificent and expressed desires to travel even further from home. They want to explore the galaxy, Hyejin said. The probe recorded numerous discussions about missions to other planets and eventual interstellar travel. They speak about it with excitement rather than fear. This news caused panic among several delegate groups. The idea of humans spreading throughout the galaxy terrified species that valued safety and predictability. Dr. In Ho, the Council's chief psychologist, presented his analysis of human behavior patterns. What we are dealing with is not just an unusual species, but one that represents a completely different approach to existence, he said. Every other known species follows similar psychological patterns. They seek pleasure and avoid pain. They minimize risk and maximize safety. They cooperate when beneficial, but prioritize individual survival. Humans appear to operate on different principles entirely. They seek challenges that test their limits. They volunteer for dangerous missions to help others. They find meaning and satisfaction in overcoming seemingly impossible obstacles. He showed brain scans the probe had somehow obtained showing human neural activity during dangerous situations. Their brains release pleasure chemicals when facing extreme challenges. They are literally programmed to enjoy what would terrorize the rest of us. What does this mean for galactic security? Asked Military Commander Hyun-woo. If humans achieve interstellar travel, they will not be deterred by the usual barriers that contain other species. They will not fear the emptiness of space or the dangers of unknown worlds. Chancellor Wu Jin stood alone in his private chambers, staring through the massive viewing window at the stars beyond. 5 days had passed since the emergency council session, and he still could not sleep properly. The weight of the decision they faced pressed down on him like the gravity of a dying star. Behind him on his desk lay reports from every major intelligence agency in the galaxy. All of them reached the same terrifying conclusion. The humans were not just dangerous because of what they did. They were dangerous because of what they represented. A species that had evolved beyond the fundamental fears that kept civilization stable. A soft chime announced the arrival of Intelligence Officer Siho. The young officer entered quietly and placed a new datapad on the desk with hands that trembled slightly. Chancellor, you need to see this immediately, Seho said. Our long-range monitoring stations have detected something that changes everything. Wu Jin turned from the window and picked up the datapad. The information displayed there made his 3 hearts skip beats. Radio signals from Earth had been traveling through space for over 100 years. Primitive electromagnetic transmissions that announced humanity's existence to anyone with the technology to detect them. How far have these signals traveled? Wu Jin asked. At least 40 light-years in all directions, sir. Any species within that range would know about human civilization. By now, this was worse than the Chancellor had imagined. The council had spent days debating how to handle the human problem while assuming they still had time to make careful decisions. But if human radio signals had already reached other systems, then the secret was out. Have any other species detected these transmissions? Siho nodded grimly. We intercepted communications from at least 6 different civilizations discussing the strange signals from the Sol system. Most dismissed them as natural phenomena, but a few have correctly identified them as artificial transmissions. Wu Jin felt cold despite the warm temperature in his chambers. If other species knew about humans, then the Council's quarantine plan would not work. Someone would eventually investigate the source of the signals. There is more, sir, Seiho continued. The probe's final data dump included recordings of humans actively trying to communicate with alien life. They have been deliberately broadcasting messages into space, hoping to make contact with other civilizations. The datapad showed images that made Wu Jin's skin turn pale. Human scientists named Da-Un and Kong-Ho were celebrating the launch of what they called messages to the stars. Mathematical formulas, pictures of their planet, and even recordings of human music were being transmitted at light speed toward nearby star systems. They are advertising their location to the entire galaxy, Wu Jin said in disbelief. Yes, sir. The probe recorded multiple human space agencies working on projects designed to attract alien attention. They have built radio telescopes to listen for responses and seemed genuinely excited about the possibility of first contact. This revelation shattered every assumption the Council had made about human behavior. Most species that achieved radio technology became more cautious about revealing their location to potential threats. Humans were doing the opposite. They were actively seeking contact with unknown alien civilizations. What kind of messages are they sending? Wu Jin asked. Siho activated a holographic display that showed the contents of human interstellar transmissions. Mathematical sequences that demonstrated their intelligence, images of human anatomy and their planet's characteristics, audio recordings of human voices speaking in multiple languages. They are providing a complete introduction to their species and planet, Siho explained. Any alien civilization receiving these signals would know exactly where to find them and what to expect when they arrive. The most disturbing part was the tone of the human messages. They expressed hope, curiosity, and friendship toward whatever alien species might be listening. The humans seemed to assume that contact with extraterrestrial life would be positive and beneficial. They have no concept of the dangers they are inviting, Wu Jin said. No, sir. The probe's analysis suggests they view potential alien contact as an exciting opportunity rather than an existential threat. Military Commander Hyun Woo arrived for the emergency briefing looking more worried than Wu Jin had ever seen him. The veteran soldier had fought in 3 galactic wars and survived encounters with the most dangerous species known to exist. But the thought of humans expanding into space clearly terrified him. What is our current military assessment? Wu Jin asked. Catastrophic, sir, Hyun Woo replied. If humans develop faster than light travel, they will be impossible to contain using conventional methods. He activated a tactical display showing human technological progress. Their advancement rate is unprecedented. They went from primitive aircraft to space travel in less than 100 years. At this pace, they could achieve interstellar capability within the next century. Can we stop them? Hyun Woo hesitated before answering. A preemptive strike might be possible if we act immediately, but the probe's data suggests it would require overwhelming force to succeed. The tactical analysis showed why. Humans had spread across their entire planet and built redundant civilization centers. Their military forces were decentralized, and their population was in the billions. Destroying human technological capability would require devastating their entire world. How many ships would we need? Wu Jin asked. Conservative estimates suggest at least 3 full battle fleets, sir, and that assumes they do not detect our approach and prepare defenses. 3 fleets would strip our borders bare. Other hostile species might interpret such a massive deployment as an opportunity to attack Council territory. Yes, sir. And there is another problem. Hyun Woo showed intercepted communications from several member species whose military leaders were quietly discussing the human situation. Some were beginning to see humans as potential allies rather than threats. The warrior. Clans are particularly interested, he explained. They view human combat capabilities as impressive and want to recruit them as mercenaries. The research collective wants to study their unique psychology. Even some pacifist factions think humans might be valuable allies because of their protective instincts toward weaker species. This split opinion made military action politically impossible. The Council could not authorize an attack on humans if significant portions of their own membership opposed it. Diplomat Sora arrived to present the final complication that would determine humanity's fate. She carried reports from the Council's monitoring stations that had been observing human space activities. "Chancellor, we have detected human spacecraft approaching the edge of their solar system," she announced. "Their exploration probes are already traveling toward nearby stars." The display showed primitive human vessels moving slowly through space using chemical rockets and solar sails. They would take centuries to reach other star systems, but they were definitely heading toward Council territory. More importantly, we have intercepted human communications discussing faster-than-light theoretical research. Multiple human scientists are working on concepts that could lead to breakthrough propulsion technologies. Wu Jin studied the data with growing dread. Every human research project seemed designed to overcome the barriers that naturally contained other species. They were working on artificial gravity, radiation shielding, closed-loop life support, and most alarmingly, something called warp drive theory. "How long before they achieve practical FTL travel?" he asked. "Conservative estimates range from 50 to 200 years, sir. But given their acceleration rate and collaborative research methods, it could happen much sooner." Siho added the final piece of disturbing intelligence. "Sir, we have also detected human SETI programs actively listening for alien radio signals. If any species attempts to communicate with them, the humans will respond immediately. And based on their psychological profiles, they will view such contact as proof that space exploration is safe and worthwhile," Sora added. The three officers stood quietly while Chancellor Wu Jin processed the implications. Humans were already reaching toward the stars. They were actively seeking alien contact. Their technological development was accelerating rapidly, and they possessed psychological traits that made them virtually unstoppable once they set their minds on a goal. Military action was impractical. Diplomatic contact was too dangerous. Ignoring them was no longer possible since their radio signals had already announced their existence to multiple civilizations. "What do you recommend?" Wu Jin asked. The three officers exchanged glances before Yunwu spoke for all of them. "Sir, we recommend full galactic quarantine with extreme prejudice." "Explain." "We establish a 50-light-year exclusion zone around the Sol system. Any species attempting to enter human space is warned away by Council forces. We monitor human development continuously but make no contact under any circumstances. And if humans develop FTL and leave their system, we hope they choose to explore in directions away from Council space. If they approach our territory, we implement graduated response protocols, starting with automated warning beacons and escalating to military intervention if necessary." So Ra added her perspective. "We also begin immediate diplomatic efforts to convince other species that humans represent a galactic threat."